November 6, 2005. In broad daylight, a group of men descends on Miami International Airport with precision and nerve. Their target, a Brink's warehouse, holding millions in cash. Armed and relentless, they storm the facility, forcing security guards and staff to the ground. Within minutes, they make off with $7.4 million. No shots fired, no alarms triggered. The mastermind behind this daring robbery, Carls Monzon, a man with no criminal record, yet the orchestrator of a heist that would leave law enforcement stunned. How did an ordinary man pull off such an extraordinary crime? This is the true story of Carls Monzon and the audacious Miami airport heist. At 32, Carls Monzon was the picture of an American dream realized. A Cuban immigrant living a quiet, law-abiding life in Miami. He had carved out a stable existence and was committed to earning an honest living in pursuit of the dream that had brought him to the United States. But in April 2005, a single phone call shattered that tranquility, a call that would lead him down a path of no return, forever altering the course of his life. In 1989, Carls Monzon arrived in Miami, leaving behind the only life he had ever known in Cuba. Like so many before him, he dreamed of a future where hard work and determination could finally be rewarded, something he knew was impossible in his homeland. No matter how hard you work in Cuba, there is no future, Carls would later reflect, a sentiment that fueled his quest for a new life in America. But the promise of a brighter future took an unexpected turn with a call from his childhood friend and former neighbor, Onilio Diaz. Onilio, now working as a security guard for Brink's at Miami International Airport, had startling news. He was involved in transporting immense amounts of cash, up to $100 million at a time. Diaz revealed the staggering details to Carls. The money arrived on Lufthansa jets from Germany, sent by Commerzbank, one of the country's largest financial institutions. Brink's employed Diaz and a small team of guards to escort these fortunes from the plane to a bonded warehouse on the airport's outskirts, where the cash would go through customs clearance. There, the guards would inspect the bags, ensuring they were untouched before loading them into armored cars for the short drive to the Miami branch of the Federal Reserve, just 4 miles away. However, Diaz had noticed some serious security issues at the cargo terminal where they worked. He observed that the guards often ignored the safety protocols they were supposed to follow. For example, Diaz mentioned that the warehouse doors were frequently left wide open, especially since there was no air conditioning inside. At the warehouse where the cash was stored, there was a door that directly faced the street, making it an ideal spot for a quick and easy getaway if someone were planning a heist. The vulnerability of this door and other security lapses did not go unnoticed by Diaz, but despite recognizing the opportunity, he wasn't willing to betray his employer and commit the robbery himself. Instead, Diaz began to think about who might be able to pull it off and immediately thought of Carls. Diaz knew that Carls was in need of money to adopt a child, and he believed he might be in the best position to carry out the heist. Although Carls had managed to achieve some aspects of his American dream, such as owning a modest car and a house, there was still something missing in his life. Carls and his wife, Cinnamon, whom he married in 2012, longed to start a family. Unfortunately, they did not have a child. After enduring multiple failed pregnancies, the couple made the difficult decision to pursue adoption as a way to fulfill their dream of becoming parents. However, this path came with its own set of challenges. Adoption was an expensive process. When Diaz approached him with a proposal to carry out a multi-million-dollar heist, Carls found himself at a crossroads. Still, the prospect of securing the money needed to adopt a child and finally realize his dream of having a family was too tempting to resist. The financial strain and emotional longing to become a father clouded his judgment, leading him to accept Diaz's proposal without hesitation. This decision would set Carls on a dangerous path, one that would forever change his life. Despite that Carls had a clean record, he was obsessed with crime movies and court procedural television shows, including Law and Order. SVU, and Dateline NBC. He would later use these shows as his guide in carrying out the Miami Brinks heist. When Diaz made the call, Carls was working as a driver for United Rentals, a company that leases construction equipment. His days were spent behind the wheel, transporting heavy machinery from one job site to another, a routine that offered little excitement but provided a steady income. However, when Diaz presented him with the idea of pulling off a multi-million-dollar heist, Carls found himself intrigued, though skeptical. He recalled telling Diaz that the plan sounded almost too easy and too good to be true. After weighing the risks, Carls made the fateful decision to give it a try. With the decision made, Carls began to prepare for the heist, drawing on the knowledge he had accumulated from years of watching crime shows. He knew that planning would be crucial, and before diving in, he needed to determine if the heist was even feasible. His first step was to gain a better understanding of the layout and security of the target. Carls started by booking a room at the Miami Hilton Hotel, which offered a strategic vantage point overlooking the airport's warehouse and tarmac. From this room, he could observe the daily operations and identify potential vulnerabilities. It was here, with a clear view of the warehouse where the cash was stored, that Carls began to put his plan into motion. The hotel room became his makeshift command center, where he meticulously studied the patterns of movement, timing, and security protocols, all in an effort to determine if the heist could truly be pulled off. Carls began his plan by booking a room at the Miami Hilton Hotel, strategically choosing this location because it offered a direct view of the airport's warehouse and tarmac where the cash was stored. He selected a room that faced south, hoping to gain a clear view of the operations below. From this vantage point, Carls could see the pilots and guards transporting bags of cash from the airplanes to the warehouse, giving him a sense of the timing and procedures involved. However, as he observed the scene from his south-facing room, Carls realized that his view was partially obscured. While he could see some of the activity, critical details were hidden from sight, making it difficult to gather all the information he needed. The following week, he rented a room on the opposite side of the hotel, facing north, which he hoped would offer a better perspective. This new vantage point proved more advantageous, and Carls continued to refine his observations from there. Over the next several weeks, he checked into the north-facing room about 9 more times, each time gathering more detailed insights into the daily routines and security measures at the warehouse. I was just back and forth every week. 1 week in the north side, 1 week in the south side to make sure they never changed their routine, Carls said. Carls couldn't shake the feeling that the bags might not really contain cash. What if it was all a trick? This worry made him drive to the tarmac twice, pretending each time that he was just looking for a job. But in reality, he was trying to check if the money was really there. Finally, he saw the bags of money himself, and that was enough to convince him. I wanted to make sure the money is there, because it's maybe a setup. Then, I saw the bags of money. I knew the money was true. With the money in sight, and the routine for unloading the bags staying the same, Carls believed Diaz was telling the truth and decided to go ahead with the robbery. Before moving forward with the plan, Carls made sure to scout the tarmac for a spot without security cameras. He needed a place where he could hide a getaway car without being seen. Earlier, Carls had already prepared for the heist by stealing 2 Ford F-450s from a dealership near Jacksonville, Florida, with the help of a friend. They loaded the stolen trucks onto a tractor trailer that Carls had taken from his workplace. After that, they drove about 100 miles to Miami, where they stored the stolen vehicles in a warehouse, keeping them hidden and ready for when they would be needed during the robbery. Everything seemed to be lining up perfectly for Carls. He imagined the day when he would finally have enough money to retire and live comfortably. With the getaway vehicles securely stored away, it was time to focus on the next step, gathering a team to help with the heist. Carls started assembling a crew, each member having a varied background and experience in crime. They all had different plans for what they would do with their share of the loot. While some dreamed of luxurious lifestyles, Others were focused on settling old scores or funding new ventures. Despite their differing visions, they were united in their goal to pull off the heist and secure their futures. Carl's crew included his uncle-in-law, Conrado Pinky Pereira, who had a history of criminal activities, but was eager to turn his life around by starting a legitimate business with his share of the money. Then there was Carl's brother-in-law, Jeffrey Boatwright, who was battling drug addiction. Despite his struggles, Carl saw potential in him and brought him on board. The final member of the team was Roberto Perez, a co-worker of Carl's, who agreed to join the heist. While all this preparation was happening, Carl's wife, Cinnamon, was pregnant with their baby girl. Carl's kept the entire plan hidden from her. It wasn't until after the warehouse robbery had been executed that she learned about her husband's involvement. Around 2 months before the heist, tragedy struck Carl's and his wife, Cinnamon. She was rushed to the hospital with high blood pressure, a complication that led to the heartbreaking loss of their baby, who was stillborn. The devastating event deepened Carl's resolve to change their financial situation. While the grief of losing their child weighed heavily on him, it also fueled his determination to make sure they would never have to face such hardship again. Carl's later reflected on his motivations, explaining that it wasn't just about stealing a large sum of money. The loss of their baby made him think about their future and the possibility of adoption. "I wasn't just doing it just to take all that money. Recently I lost my baby, so I just want to have enough money to adopt a kid. Adopting a kid is expensive." The time had finally come to execute the heist that Carl's had meticulously planned. On November 6, 2005, everything was set in motion when Diaz called Carl's, giving him the signal that the plane had landed and the bags of money were ready for the taking. With the call received, Carl's quickly set off in a pickup truck, accompanied by his carefully chosen associates, each ready to play their part in the daring robbery. Meanwhile, at the airport, Diaz, who was in on the plan, along with other security guards, escorted the people carrying the bags of cash to the terminal for inspection. This routine procedure created the perfect window of opportunity. While the inspection was underway, the bags of money were temporarily unattended, making it easier for Carl's and his crew to swoop in and carry out the theft without immediate detection. With the plan in full swing, each member of the crew took on their assigned roles. Perez was stationed as the lookout, keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble or unexpected interference. Jeffrey Boatwright, Carl's brother-in-law, was in position behind the wheel of one of the stolen black pickup trucks, ready to drive them away as soon as the job was done. Carl's and his wife's uncle, Pereira, were left with the task of actually carrying out the robbery, securing the bags of cash, and making their escape. Despite the detailed planning and careful coordination, Carl's couldn't shake his anxiety. It was his first time committing such a major crime, and the weight of the situation was overwhelming. His nerves were on edge, knowing that any mistake could lead to failure, or worse, getting caught. Reflecting on that tense moment later, Carl's admitted, "My blood pressure went through the roof. I've never done nothing like that before. I was like, I don't even know what to do. I just keep my cool, and I keep doing what I'm supposed to be doing." As the group arrived at the Brinks warehouse, their nerves were immediately heightened by the sudden sound of sirens. A van full of U.S. Customs police sped past them, heading straight for the post office building directly in front of their target. Jeffrey, who was behind the wheel of one of the stolen pickup trucks, instinctively slowed down. He wanted to see what was happening, and more importantly, to wait until the police had left the area. The presence of the police added an unexpected layer of tension, and the group was visibly shaken. Jeffrey and Pereira exchanged worried glances, thinking of backing out of the operation. But in the face of the unsettling turn of events, Carl's took charge. Sensing the growing unease among his associates, he stepped in to encourage them to stay focused and stick to the plan. Ironically, the police had provided the perfect setup for Carl's and his crew. By the time he had convinced Pereira and Boatwright to continue with the robbery, around 3 p.m., the bag exchange was underway at the warehouse, making it the perfect time to strike without anybody stopping them. Ironically, the police presence, which initially seemed like a major obstacle, ended up creating an unexpected advantage for Carls and his crew. The commotion and distraction caused by the police van meant that security and attention were diverted away from the Brinks warehouse. By the time Carls managed to reassure Pereira and Jeffrey and get them back on track, it was around 3 p.m., a crucial time when the bag exchange was in full swing at the warehouse. This timing turned out to be ideal for their plan, as it allowed them to strike while the area was busy and less focused on potential threats. As they arrived at the warehouse, the team knew it was their moment to act. Carls and Pereira quickly exited the truck. They pulled bandanas over their faces to conceal their identities and blend in with the chaos. Next, they made their way to the loading dock. The dock doors were wide open, providing a clear and unobstructed entry. They climbed up onto the dock and pushed through the open doors, slipping inside the warehouse. Inside the warehouse, Carls and Pereira were met with a scene that matched Diaz's description perfectly. The large open space was cluttered with crates and mounds of plastic packing wrap. Near the entrance, a small group of guards, including Diaz, was busy sorting through a large pile of canvas bags. These bags were filled to the brim with cash, and the operation of sorting was a routine part of handling the day's shipment. The shipment for that day was particularly substantial, minus 42 bags of money, totaling a massive $88 million. Each bag contained roughly $2.1 million, making them heavy and cumbersome. Without hesitation, Carls and Pereira drew their guns. They shouted commands, ordering the startled guards to drop to the floor. The guards, caught off guard and outnumbered, complied quickly, their hands raised in surrender. With the guards subdued and their immediate threat neutralized, Carls and Pereira moved swiftly. They selected 6 of the bags, each one weighing about 38 pounds, and began to transport them towards the bay door. The bay door was their exit route, and they reached for it in a timely manner, aiming to get the stolen cash out and into their getaway vehicles before the situation could turn against them. As they hurriedly made their escape, one of the bags slipped from their grasp and fell to the warehouse floor. Carls and Pereira knew that retrieving it would slow them down, so they decided to leave the bag behind and focused instead on loading the remaining money into the truck. Once the 6 bags were secured in the truck bed, they sped away from the scene. The heist was carried out without a single gunshot being fired. In total, they made off with $7.4 million. Despite the smooth execution of their escape, it was claimed that one of the security guards involved in the incident had to be taken to the hospital due to a cardiac issue. The shock of the robbery must have contributed to it. After leaving the robbery scene, the gang drove to their predetermined location for the next stage of their escape plan. Upon arrival, they quickly transferred the cash from the stolen truck to plastic bags to avoid them leaving behind any incriminating evidence. Before proceeding with the transfer, Carls thoroughly checked the bags for any potential tracking devices or markings that could lead authorities to them. Finding none, he gave the green light for the money to be transferred into the plastic bags. With the cash securely packed away, the crew switched vehicles once more, this time moving the money into Carl's personal car, which had been discreetly parked about 5 miles away on a quiet residential street. Meanwhile, the first 2 stolen trucks, now tainted with evidence of the heist, were disposed of to eliminate any traces of their involvement. The trucks were set on fire, destroying any forensic evidence that could link them to the robbery. When I was watching TV, everyone was getting caught with DNA, fingerprints, so I decided to burn the trucks. Till this day, I don't even know where the trucks are. Somebody got paid good money to do that, Carls would later reveal. Meanwhile, the guards at the airport, still reeling from the shock of the robbery, were left with very little information. The FBI launched a public appeal, offering a substantial reward for any information leading to the capture of the criminals. The move increased the pressure on Carls and his accomplices, bringing them closer to being apprehended. Back at their safe house, the crew gathered to sum up the proceeds from their heist. As they began to sort and count the money, they were struck by the sheer amount they had managed to steal. The piles of cash accumulated to a staggering total of $7.4 million. Reflecting on the immense amount of money, Carls later remarked, "I didn't even know it was a big deal. I don't even know how much money was there. We got a couple of bags and we left. Everybody got a good cut. That way we knew there would be no issues." After giving every member their share, Carls sounded a strong note of warning. No one was to spend too much of their share in one place to avoid detection. Carls' caution mirrored the advice famously given by Jimmy Conway in the film Goodfellas. In the 1990 Martin Scorsese movie, which dramatizes the 1978 Lufthansa heist at New York's JFK Airport. Despite the substantial financial gain, the film reveals that most of those involved in the heist met tragic ends. The following day, the news of the heist made national headlines, but no one knew the people involved. Although Carls' wife later found out her husband had pulled off the heist, she was left in a state of disbelief. As for Carls, who had a $1.6 million cut, he continued his normal life. He didn't want to change his lifestyle, and just put all the money away till it was safe for him to spend it. He stashed most of it in the attic and PVC pipes of his family's property in Homestead, a rural area halfway between Miami and the Florida Keys. All the while, Carls still retained his job at the rental company, not wanting to draw attention to himself, while Cinnamon kept working as a receptionist at Vista magazine. But Carls soon realized their cover would be blown by a slightly less ordinary familial drama. While most of his associates followed Carls' earlier advice, his brother-in-law, Jeffrey, did not. He threw caution to the wind and engaged in a spending spree. From drugs to alcohol to expensive jewelry and strippers, Jeffrey was living life to its fullest, spending most of his $1.4 million share recklessly. Carls, sensing the danger that awaited them if they got exposed, approached Jeffrey. He tried to convince him to ease up on spending. "I gave you $100,000 in $100 bills. That's supposed to last at least a year or 2 years. The street is hot now, so you're supposed to stay down low. You're supposed not be flashing the money," Carls told him. It was not the case that Carls was scared of the police. Rather, he feared he could end up kidnapped or robbed. But Jeffrey wouldn't listen. Instead, he went into hiding, though Carls eventually tracked him down at a Miami hotel. He brought a baseball bat with the intention of knocking some sense into his head, but was convinced by Cinnamon to go easy on him. By the time Jeffrey opened the door, he was already high. He had taken drugs and also got 2 hookers who were also high. Afterward, Jeffrey promised to leave Miami for a couple of years, a promise he never kept. Unfortunately for Jeffrey, things took a different turn when a gang kidnapped him outside of a strip club in December. The kidnappers demanded $1 million in ransom from Carls, which he paid. But soon after Jeffrey was released, he returned to his vices. As later revealed by Carls, he was worried about the way Jeffrey was spending recklessly. As a result, he hired 2 friends to kidnap him and steal his money. The FBI was investigating the heist under the direction of Special Agent Alex Peraza, who suspected that one of the supervisors at the warehouse was the inside man. However, there was no proof. Next thing, Brinks offered a $150,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of the money and the capture of the criminals. The reward soon netted a tipster from within Carls' circle. One of his friends had overheard some of the perpetrators boast about the heist. So he provided the FBI with a list of 4 suspects, including Carls. The FBI tapped the phones of the suspects so they could monitor their conversation. And on February 17, 2006, it all came crashing down. 3 months earlier, the kidnappers that Carls had previously hired to scare Jeffrey decided to kidnap Jeffrey the second time of their own volition, hoping to extract more money from Carls. They kept Jeffrey hostage and went on to demand $1 million in ransom from Carls, which he paid. After he paid the ransom, Jeffrey was released. He had been beaten and his fingernails had been torn with pliers. Despite the severity of his wounds and the psychological trauma he had experienced, Jeffrey's lifestyle appeared unaffected. Just a short while after his release, on February 16, 2006, he was back at the Gold Rush Strip Club, the very place where he had been abducted. There, two women lured him out of the club and into an SUV in the parking lot. Once inside, two men got in and hit him on the head with the butt of a pistol and tied a shirt over his face. After about 12 hours, Robert Salty, a friend of Jeffrey who was secretly collaborating with the kidnappers, called Carls asking for $500,000 in ransom. The kidnappers threatened to kill Jeffrey if Carls failed to pay up. Carls, who was already frustrated, refused to pay the ransom and asked them to go ahead and kill him. However, after much persuasion from his loved ones, he agreed to pay it. The kidnappers went on to call Carl's wife, who called and begged him to cooperate to save her brother's life. He hung up on her too. He would later receive more calls from his mother-in-law and his wife's grandmother. At that point, he had no choice than to pay the ransom. However, rather than drop off the cash, he decided he wanted to see the kidnappers' faces, so he waited for their call. As Carls was begrudgingly brokering his return, he was pulled over by authorities while taking his wife to the doctor on appointment. You'd recall that his phone had been tapped by the FBI. Initially, he thought the kidnappers had been tailing him to the clinic. However, it soon dawned on him that he was about to be nabbed. He was taken to the FBI headquarters in Miami for questioning. He was shocked when he realized the officers knew about the kidnapping. Jeffrey, who was tied up in the back of the truck, was rescued in a joint operation including Miami agents, the Miami SWAT team, the Miami-Dade Police Department, and an ICE agent. In all, 5 men were arrested for the kidnapping. 3 of them, Robert Salty, Michael Sanfield, and Guillermo del Reguero, pleaded guilty and were given from 7 to 15 years. As for the other 2, Manuel Palacio and Michael Hernandez, they'd bagged 34 and 26 years in prison, respectively. That night, the SWAT team also arrested Onelio Diaz as he arrived home. Some $5,000 was found in his pockets and another $80,000 in 3 vacuum-packed bags in his vehicle. Authorities would later find $80,000 in Carl's attic too. In March of 2006, Carls and his accomplices were charged with armed robbery. They all pleaded guilty. Onelio Diaz was sentenced to 16 years and served 14. Jeffrey Boatwright was sentenced to 17 years. He served 11 and passed away shortly after his release. Jeffrey's sister, that is, Carl's wife, served 3 years for being an accessory to theft, as she had learned of the robbery after it had been committed and not reported it. Their uncle, Pinky, evaded capture for another 4 years spent on the run, but was eventually captured and sentenced to 11 years in prison. He served just fewer than 10. As for Carls Monzon, he was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. After he served 9, he was released on April 1, 2016 on parole for cooperating with investigators to help nab Jeffrey's kidnapping. Upon his release, he lived in a halfway house for 8 months. The following month, he led the FBI to the $1.2 million he had hidden on his property, and that was all the FBI would recover. The remaining $6 million stolen in the heist was never recovered to this day. Looking back on his time in prison, Carls recalled getting his GED and losing 160 pounds, but said the toughest part was not being able to be there for his family. My mom almost died twice because she got a heart attack, and my brother is sick. He's got mental issues. My other brother, he went through a big accident and almost lost his legs. I was just like there was nothing I can do. Carls and Cinnamon eventually divorced, and Carls never achieved his dream of fatherhood, though he now lives in Miami with his girlfriend and her child. After his probation ended in 2018, he started working as a truck driver for Regulated Towing Incorporated. In the end, Carls remarked, "This robbery cost me my American dream. I had the house. I had a wife. I just needed a child." And that's the end of the story of the man who defied the odds and orchestrated one of the most daring heists in recent U.S. history.